So let's look at Mark chapter 4, verse 1. And I want to read through the story the way that Mark tells us that Jesus told it. And I want to do exactly what Jesus did, and that is read it with no explanation. Because how many of you realize that the first time Jesus told the parable of the sower, he did not explain it? So I want you to imagine you have no idea what this story means. And he begins to teach by the sea, and a great multitude is gathered to him, so that he got into a boat and sat in the sea, and the whole multitude was on the land facing the sea. And he taught them many things by parables, and said to them in his teachings, "Listen, behold, a sower went out to sow. And it happened as he sowed that some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds of the air came and devoured it. And some of it fell on stony ground where it didn't have much earth. And immediately it sprang up because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. And some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no crop. But other seed fell on good ground, and it yielded a crop that sprang up, increased, and produced some 30-fold, some 60, and some 100. And he said to them, He who has ears to hear, let him hear." This is a phrase that Jesus will also use in the book of Revelation, 2nd and 3rd chapter, when he will preach to the 7 churches at Asia. You realize it's Jesus who preaches to the 7 churches at Asia. The longest recorded sermon outside of the Sermon on the Mount is actually Jesus' sermon to the 7 churches of Asia in the early part of Revelation. And every one of the 7 churches, 7 being the Hebrew number for perfection and completion, meaning Jesus is speaking to the entire body of Christ across time. That's why there's 7 churches, not 8. 7 churches, not 6. The entire church across time, what does he say at the end of every letter? He who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church. And so the same Jesus in Revelation tells an agricultural story in Mark chapter 4, in which he gives a sower going out, casting seed out, and it landing on 4 types of ground, and the birds are picking it up, and the rocks are choking it out, and the thorns are choking it out, and the good ground is producing 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold fruit. But Jesus explains nothing, turns to the crowd and says, "It's not given for you to know the secrets of the kingdom. This is why I speak to you in parables. For as Isaiah said, you have ears to hear, but you don't hear." He said, "I'd like for you to be able to hear, but you're not going to be able to comprehend." And then he moves on. And this isn't enough for the disciples who really want an explanation. And so I know that we need an explanation too, and I've already asked you to do the impossible, and that's act like you don't have an explanation, and act like you don't have any idea about where this seed goes. And if you'll play along with me on that for just a moment and not have any idea what this story is about, then you're really, really getting close to standing there in the first century going, "What in the world is a carpenter from Nazareth doing telling me a story about a dude that throws seed? Most of it doesn't even seem to grow, and that which does grow, I don't even know what he's talking about." And so that's where we land, and that's where the early church would have had to have landed and say, what is it that Jesus means when he says this? So I want to pause. I want to shift gears, and I want to take you elsewhere for just a moment in what is going to look like we are running into left field. But I've done this before a time or two, and I promise I know how to get the train back to the track. So if you'll trust me for a moment, we're going to run away to a verse that doesn't appear it has anything at all to do with the parable of the sower. I want to take you to John chapter 1, all right? We're going to stay in the book of John for 2 different passages, and I want to use these as complementary passages. They're going to appear as if they have nothing to do with our story, but then I think the light will begin to shine on something that is absolutely the key of unlocking the parable of the sower. And we're going to start in John chapter 1, beginning in verse number 1. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Watch this very important pronoun to kick off the second verse. He was in the beginning with God. He seems like the wrong word. Let's reread verse 1. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Our minds think it should say it was in the beginning with God, but John doesn't say it was in the beginning with God. John says he was in the beginning with God, which lets us know there was someone else there with God. He was in the beginning with God, but John doesn't name a person. He calls it this strange word in the Greek that has this multiple, almost rainbow definition that stretches all the way back to Aristotle. This Greek word logos. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And stretching hundreds of years back into Greek literature is a word that has so much, it drips with meaning. It's way more than just words spoken. But it is the essence of meaning itself, that everything that you can conceptualize is wrapped up in the best word we can come up with, logos. That inside of that is this, the answer to this question: what is the meaning of life? That's a great rhetorical question. People like that. What's the meaning of life? And people go, well, Jesus is the meaning of life. But if you ask it in the Greek tongue, you might have ended up with logos. It's the best thing we know. It's the essence of everything that matters. And John flips the script, takes their word and goes, no, logos isn't an it. Logos is a he. He was in the beginning with God. And then he doubles down. And he turns the creative act into the act of the he. Not just God, but the Logos. Because verse 3, all things were made through him, and without him, God made nothing that was made. Did you catch that? I know I inserted the word God there, but I wanted to differentiate between the two he's. Without the Logos, God wouldn't do anything. Without the essence of who he is, God could do nothing. And you